vegetable and plants, and the various tithes which we take off. One second, and then we moved on to the separation from the dough, which also comes originally from the ground, but then when you turn it into a dough, there's a mitzvah of challah to give the kohanim. And now I want to just, once we're on the theme of all the different gifts which originally had to be separated off for the sake of the kohanim, well, this entire structure was set up in the day when we had a temple and we had every tribe was in its place, and the entire Jewish calendar was revolving around the 7-year cycle, and the Truma and Meiser were different in each year of the 7 years. And so really we don't have, on a biblical level, almost any of this system. Of course, there's two groups. We mentioned it before, that the ones directly connected to the Shemitah cycle, like Truma and Meiser, probably are not the right. And now that we don't have Shemitah and we don't have Yovel, so the Shemitah, that system, that entire system, doesn't apply there. Right? There is a few that, even though they're agricultural, they still apply without the entire system, like Orla we mentioned, and what else did we say is something that still applies to maybe Doraita now? Kilayim, correct, that's right. And those apply even in Chutz La'aretz, some of them. So there's the other ones that I want to add now, discuss now. It's a part of Kilayim. Yeah, it's a type of Kilayim. This is with the gifts that we give to the Kohanim from the animals. From the animal. We're going to talk about the next few months. We're going to talk about the laws of Kashrut, where most people start, and that is the Kashrut of the animals, and Shechita, and how to make the animal kosher, and what Kashrut of and then of course mixing the milk and the meat and all that. That's what's coming up. But before we do that, let's finish up with the laws that have to do with separations given to the Kohanim, and we're going to see what part of it applies. As we said, the Shemitah is the Rabbanan today, the general assumption, and Truma de Ma'asrot we give off, and we have to separate them before we can eat the food, the produce that we have. The challah, you have to separate off the challah. Midar Rabbanan, we just do a little bit. We do it a little bit differently today, but we still do it in order to remind us, to make sure that it's still fresh in our minds. And one day, soon, the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt. Mashiach will come, and he'll organize our society one more time in the proper way. And this entire divine system of taking care of the various segments of the population, everybody with their function, the Kohanic function, will return to its former glory, Bezrat Hashem, sometime soon. In the meantime, I want to go through what's called Matanot Kuhuna, the gifts to the Kohanim, from the living, what's that called? Not from the vegetable kingdom, but from the animal kingdom, and that's from the animals. Okay, sure. Hirsch, you wanted to ask something?
So, in relation to the word halacha, halachot, hilchot, what is the conjugation of these terms hilchot? I know it's rooted in the term halacha, but what is it like? I thought the plural conjugation was halachot. What is hilchot?
It's when it's in smichut. Smichut is a grammar construct when you have two nouns next to each other, and one's connected to the other. So you like bayit is a house, and knesset is a place of gathering. But when you say the phrase together, the bayit turns into beit haknesset. It changes a little bit when you put the two nouns together. Same thing with Hilchot Kashrut is the correct pronunciation. We have halachot, and you have kashrut, and you put them together as a phrase. So the way the phrase is vowelized changes a little bit. So that's where you get Hilchot Kashrut instead of, if it was just standalone, you would say halachot. Okay, I used to teach Ulpan for a little bit. Apparently, I wasn't very good at it. I hope I'm better at teaching halacha. Okay, so What mitzvot are included in this discussion which we're going to have? Anybody know about things that you're supposed to separate off from the animal kingdom and give towards the Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash?
The leg part, right?
That's right. There's the front leg, which goes with the cheeks apparently, and the intestine. We'll talk about it in detail. Yes, Malti. So certain fats are brought as korbanot. They're brought as korbanot, but the Kohanim are not allowed to eat them either. What else is separated off from the animals?
Sciatic nerve. But that's
it's also not being eaten. That's just forbidden from eating, but it's not actually something given to the Kohanim or to the Beit HaMikdash. From the animal kingdom. Well, you know that.
But don't you separate the firstborn cow and give it to the
Firstborn, excellent. What would you say, Renan?
The birds.
The birds. If you happen upon a nest where the mother is hovering over little chicks and the birds, so then you have to shoo away the mother bird before you take the birds. But that's not.
It's like for the poor people that could not offer a cow, they had to offer like a.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's the laws of korbanot. A certain korbanot can be switched, and there are, but all of the korbanot, of course, from the animal kingdom. But we're saying without the temple, without the korbanot.
It's also the mitzvah Peter Chamor, which applies even now.
Good, very good, very good. It's connected to Bechor. We said the Bechor, the firstborn animal, it's usually the firstborn to the mother animal, has special holiness.
Would Pidyon Haben fall under that then?
So it's very similar to Pidyon Haben that we have the firstborn of the humans, we have the firstborn of the animals. The firstborn of the animals we actually give, or in the day they would give to the Kohen. But so where does Pidyon come in? Like a baby, we don't give to the Kohen, but we redeem it with 5 silver pieces. Where do we have Pidyon about an animal? This is what Yeshua was mentioning. That the Torah says specifically about the firstborn of a donkey. Firstborn of a donkey, we don't give to the Kohen. Instead, it gets switched out, not with 5 silver coins, but with a sheep. A sheep. A sheep. And you replace, and it's very interesting why the Torah singles out the donkey versus every other type of animal, and why it gets switched out with a sheep as opposed to any other animal. We're going to talk about it. There's one more mitzvah though we didn't mention. So, but that's like a unique version of the Bechor, the firstborn. Firstborn of every animal must be given to the Kohen. We'll talk about how we do it nowadays. But the firstborn donkey has to be redeemed. But there's another mitzvah that you didn't mention yet, maybe because you've never heard of it.
Isn't that mitzvah, the mitzvah of Peter Chamor, isn't that the only non-kosher animal semi-sacrifice? It's not like an actual sacrifice, but it's like the only non-kosher animal that gets redeemed.
Correct. I think you're right. Very cool. It's a cool mitzvah.
Well, wait a minute. What about humans, though?
There you go. Humans are not kosher animals. Yeah, he's got a point. Yeah.
Humans also are.
And they're not animals either. That's also true. Okay. Well, in some ways, some of them are.
Unfortunately.
Some of them act like. But anyway, the other mitzvah that you didn't mention. Anybody else want to stab at it? Any other mitzvahs with animals? Things that we have to separate from the animals.
You're not supposed to have 2 different types of animals pull a plow together. You can't have an ox and a horse.
That's a prohibition, but that's not a separation. It's not
But
something
it
that
is
we.
a separation. You gotta separate.
Good point. When I say separation, I mean giving, like tithing, like taking something.
I take out that in it.
So that's I think what Malti was referring to when he spoke about this. There's some parts of the fats which we don't eat, but they're not, and some of them are sacrificed on the altar, but they're not given to the Kohen. So there's two other mitzvot which we.
If we buy kosher meat today, we can assume with those fats.
The dung we're not allowed to eat, but again, it's not given to the Kohen. Kohen can't eat it either.
If
It's like the sciatic nerve. Nobody can eat it.
If we buy kosher meat today, we can assume that that's all been removed, or are they assuming that we're smart enough to remove them?
No, 100%. Everything that we're talking about now is going to be done by the rabbi who gives the kashrut supervision,
Okay.
or avoided, as we're going to learn. Okay? So don't try this at home, folks. Usually you don't have any animals at home anyways. But if you were, dog, very good. But that's a non-kosher animal. We're talking about the kosher animals. 2 other mitzvot. Anybody want to last try? Stab at it?
We need to give the chest or something.
The front leg, and that's what Misha mentioned first. We mentioned that we're going to talk about presently. 2 other ones is ma'aser be'ema. Not only the firstborn, but 1 out of every 10 animals has to be given. Like there's ma'aser from the produce, from the produce of the land. There's also ma'aser from your flock. 1 every 10, and the last one is, you have a question about it?
I have a question. So just to clarify, let's say you're like a shepherd or something, and you sell your sheep on the market.
Yeah.
If there was we have to what would happen the every 10th sheep basically?
We're going to talk about it.
Okay.
That's what we're going to learn about. That's exactly the mitzvah. So these are, like the 5 we're talking about now. These are 5 out of 613. They're all from Sukkah mentioned in the Torah. So the last one that nobody mentioned is called Reshit Hagez.
The first, what's a hagez?
Exactly. Reshit means the first. You got that right. Gez. What is gozez?
I mean, still don't know.
It's not Sprite. I can tell you that. It's not gazos. What?
Dying one?
No. It's shearing. Shearing. When you shear the wool of the sheep, of any animal, you have to give the first part of it, significant amount. We'll talk about the details later. You have to give that to the Kohen as well. So there's a lot of in-kind giving, which the Torah devises as its system for giving to the Kohanim. We mentioned a number of times. The reason why this is done is to connect every Jew to the spiritual leadership, to connect them to the temple. You'll be in maybe, I don't know, daily, but you'll be in constant contact with the designated religious leaders, and that should have an impact on you. It's a good thing to be in touch with rabbis, usually. Most rabbis. They should have a good impact on you. And so nowadays, of course, the rabbis take the place of the Kohanim. Kohen.
They get all our animals.
No, it doesn't. Nobody really gets the animals today. We'll talk about the animal products which have to be given and how it applies today, and how we avoid it today. Because, do I really want, even if I was a Kohen, would I really want some sheared sheep wool?
Yeah. No.
Probably not. Probably not.
Sheep are dirty.
Sheep wool, as a matter of fact, is not used
But I would like
for
10% of your
textiles.
flock.
It's very coarse wool.
So what is
What's
it?
the name of
The one that we use, we first of all, this is cotton. But even if we're going to use wool, it's wool from very special types of sheep. It's not the standard.
I would, however, like.
It's not good for much. Nothing. It gets thrown out.
No,
Most
no,
of
no,
the
no.
nothing. It's not worth it to use it. Maybe so the shepherds can use it for something, but
What about
my
wool?
experience?
yeah, I think they make out of sheep's wool. They make
Sweaters and all sorts of
very
things.
expensive ones because you really have to process it a lot to make it usable.
Well,
And
no,
we-
you-
but-
you-
but,
you
it's
carve-
not.
I've done the process all the way through, Rabbi.
Of course, you've done it for fun. We all do it because it's the ancient, crafts. But
So
it's
the
not
only-
practical.
No, there's big machines that card it. There's huge carders. These huge wheels spin. You can do tons and tons of
Yes,
wool.
that's
But it's
reconstructing
not-
what they used to do, and now we have machinery. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't spin threads and make clothing. Of course, there's wool clothing, but the standard sheep wool, when you see a sheep and you shear the sheep off the wool, that's not what they use. They use different type of wool, a special breed of sheep that has softer fibers. The coarse fibers that we have on the average sheep is not what's used in the wool industry.
Coarser wool is used in carpets and furnishings such as curtains or
There you go.
Wool bedding.
That's right, but not for clothing. So the average
They-
Kohen
they-
wouldn't need carpeting.
I remember when I was younger, sweaters used to be scratchy.
With very fine wool.
There's a different type of wool. It's a very fine wool, right? The clothing is not made from this type of sheep wool. So don't think that you're gonna, shearing your sheep. The Kohen's waiting because he needs a new shirt. No, it's just not practical anymore. So that's why we really avoid it, and we're going to discuss how. But first, let's start from the beginning, and we'll go through each of these mitzvot. Okay, so we listed all the mitzvot. We missed it. What are the 5? David, you want to write them on the board for us?
Sure.
Zeroa lechayayim v'keva. The I think it's called the foreleg.
You have to speak, to put it in Hebrew, it's so Hilchot.
Write it out in English. Zeroa. Zeroa. Lechayayim and keva. That's one category. That's limbs of the animal, which had to be given to the Kohen. Zeroa lechayayim v'keva.
These halachot, Rav, are they Doraita or the Rabbanon?
Doraita. They all come from verses in the Torah. The next one is, number 2 is Bechor, which is, of course, the firstborn of the animal.
What if the firstborn has blemishes? Can you give the second?
We're going to talk about all the details forthcoming. Number 3 is sort of a sub-branch, and that is the firstborn of the donkey. A unique case, but it's a separate one. So number 3, the firstborn of the donkey. Number 4 is the 10th animal. The 10th animal, like we spoke about the maaser from the produce. There's maaser of the animal kingdom as well.
You only have 9 animals, you don't have to
You
give.
don't have to give. You're right. You're right. And the next one, number 5, is what we finished up with, Reshit Hagez, the first shearing.
You also go give your first fruit.
We talked about it. You weren't here. But we talked about all the vegetable products, and the first fruits we talked about the bikurim and the whole procession coming up to Jerusalem. No, not floats, decorated oxen.
When they tie the red string.
I don't know if it's specifically red, but all color, all very colorful. Thank you very much, David. So we have 5 mitzvot which we're going to discuss presently. Gifts to the Kohanim, not from the vegetation, but from the animal kingdom. Okay? Questions so far? Let's begin. First one is Zeroa lechayayim v'keva. Do we have enough chumashim for everybody? You're all asking like I'm telling you something that is I'm making stuff up. They're all verses. All these are verses in the Torah. What do I say always to the guys who are scratching their heads and says these are verses in the Torah? I tell them, read the book. Right? It's a good book.
Sure.
The Torah. Read it. Look up, please, Devarim, chapter 18. So it's the foreleg is the zeroa. While you're, someone give us a page number.
18 you said?
Chapter 18.
Chapter 18, verse 3.
Oh, it's page 367.
Thank you, page 367. If you don't have one, there's one on top of the standard. There's 2 on top of the standard. Shua, there's 2 on top of the standard behind you. 2 books.
Rabbi, the Jewish survey does not support what you're saying.
You like
Jews
it,
will not use it.
It's not used for clothing.
People don't wear clothing, people wear synthetics, you mean.
That's what I meant. Not used for clothing. Of course, there's uses for it. Not used for clothing.
A lot of it actually is.
For clothing.
What page?
Oh, okay. I'll have to look that up then.
A lot of suits are all wool.
I know they're all wool, but they're not
English,
sheep's
you
wool.
said?
Sorry, they're not sheep's
They
wool.
are,
They are?
yeah.
These, the type of sheeps that we breed here in Israel? We'll look it up. Okay.
Yeah,
We'll
the
discuss.
only ones that aren't used are the long hair ones that are like almost, like almost look like they have hair on them, and that's not usable at all. That's a very small group.
Very interesting. Okay, we'll have to look it up. By all means, I'm happy to get corrected. If I stand to be corrected, please. There's a bracha that you say before you give these gifts. So the first, so who can read for us? Chapter 18, verse 3, please. Yeah, in English, please.
Oh, in English?
Yeah, Noam.
And this shall be the priest's due from the people, from them that offer a sacrifice, whether it be ox or sheep. And they shall give unto the priest the shoulder and the 2 cheeks and the maw. What's the maw?
The mom.
Yeah, what's the maw?
I was gonna ask, yeah.
It's a part of the intestine. It's part of the intestine. And so you give the, what's it called? Can you read that slower? What do you have to give?
Unto the priest the shoulder.
The shoulder, all right. Zeroa, we've been translating as the foreleg. The foreleg, if an animal, so it's 4 legs.
Yeah.
So the front shoulder goes together with the leg. So leg, shoulder, it's one unit. So you give him the leg and the shoulder. And then what's next? Noam?
A shoulder, 2 cheeks. And
2
also
cheeks.
cheeks.
Lechayayim, 2 cheeks.
Are we talking facial, like the cheek
Yeah,
meat?
yeah, the cheek meat from
Cheek
the
is used to mean more than one thing, that's what I'm asking.
more than.
Cheek is also used to refer to the buttocks.
I think
We're referring to the facial cheek meat then.
as far as I understand, it's
What
the
kind of
face.
meat is there on the face?
I'll have to check.
Why would you have the cheek? I've never heard of that.
You can buy like at like
Well,
some
maybe you should try
supermarkets
something.
like cheek or
It's
like beef.
considered, in Asian cultures, I know it's considered
It,
prime.
it refers to the face. It includes the tongue. Tongue, people eat tongue.
Yeah,
Right?
it becomes good.
Includes the tongue.
Concentration camps.
The, and the keva is it's the intestine. Everything that's in the intestine. It usually works out to be, Rav Melamed says, 8% of the weight of the kosher part of the animal. So 8% of the kosher part of the animal,
About a 10.
which is similar to, we said the gifts to the Kohen, 10%, 4%. This is a lot, yeah.
Just to clarify, it says the shoulder, meaning one shoulder?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
We don't.
From all kosher animals we're talking about, not from birds and not from, yeah.
The rear legs is not mentioned because what's happened with Yaakov.
There's a separate mitzvah about the Gid HaNasheh, the sciatic nerve, but that's not here. That's not given to the Kohen.
But it's not mentioned because of that, or?
No, it's just not mentioned because that's not what the Torah says. The Torah says you give the front leg. Maybe it's considered to be better. I don't know.
Yeah, because like the better meat is in the.
In the back. Better is in the back. Interesting. So
For sure. There is. There's more than one. And also kosher vegetables.
now the key point here is that if you are a Kohen yourself, you don't have to give the gifts to the other Kohanim. Right? The whole point is to support the Kohanim or the religious leadership, as we said. And not only that,
This still happened in the Second Temple where the Kohanim were usually the richest people because they won the bids to become the Kohen. So why do they need to be supported? If that's the point of the Korbanot.
yeah. So this we talked about it. We talked about it at length that in the Second Temple period there was quite a lot of changes in the standard order. We're going back to First Temple time, trying to create the ideal system with all the tribes in their proper places, and Shemitah and Yovel. Second Temple was a whole different ballgame. So we mentioned that at some point the rabbis had you giving two different challahs. When we're talking about challahs, one challah was burned, one challah was given to the Kohanim, but that was a challah which you didn't have to keep the laws of purity and impurity with. And then at one point they gave the meiser to the Kohanim instead of to the Levium. We talked about how they really changed it up quite a lot during the Second Temple period. But first we're describing the original halachot of the Torah. Okay?
Did they sort of screw, I had the impressions from last week's Haftarah, they really screwed it up in the Second Temple, basically.
Well, since we don't have a temple anymore, there must have been something messed up because it got destroyed.
Yeah.
But no, it was a messy business. The Second Temple, so much so that Rav Kook, when he describes the first versus the Second Temple, he loved historiography. which is like explaining the grand sweep of history. He's famous for interpreting that now we're at the beginning of the redemption, the final redemption after thousands of years of exile. When he describes the first verse of the second temple, he says that actually, and it's based on the Talmud, that the second temple, almost from the beginning, they knew it was not going to be the final redemption. In many ways, the second temple period, the entire second temple period, was preparing us for the long exile. Right,
So then why tease us with a temple?
Well, it wasn't much more than just a tease.
Wow, it
But,
seems like it was a giant, that's all it was. I mean, no,
It was a votive. So we're switching.
Listen,
I mean, I know it was
wh-
functional, but what do they do?
That's always the
He
problem.
gave us the temple in front of us and says, all right, now I'm gonna destroy it again.
No, that's
Maybe
always
well have just not done that.
it's always the problem with interpreting history in hindsight. And at the time, they didn't know that this was not going to be.
Well, you just said it seemed like they did know that.
No. I wasn't saying that they knew that, but maybe subconsciously or something. But Rav Kook was explaining that it seems that way in hindsight, because what did the rabbis institute in the Second Temple period? Everything that we know of, Judaism as we know it, the prayers, the blessings, the structure of what we call, all these detailed laws and all the definitions. It was all set out by the rabbis, Second Temple period and afterwards, right, directly afterwards, in the period of what we call Chazal, our sages of blessed memory. So this whole structure, fascinating how it all works, even though we're in exile. They made it up when we had the temple. And of course there were some adaptations that had to be made after the temple was destroyed. But ultimately, the reason we can say now, in hindsight, why they devised such a grand and detailed structure of religious life, we can say now there was maybe the hand of God, maybe they didn't know it consciously, but it made Judaism livable even without the temple, even without
Why didn't they
the.
do it after the first temple?
It's a good question.
Wouldn't you say
They did essentially. 70 years later, they're already 48 years later, they're already coming back to rebuild the second temple.
Right, I mean,
Right.
but why not?
The proclamation of Cyrus was only 48 years later. So.
Wouldn't you say that that Ezra at the time had to come up with the Siddur and the structure during that time? Because when everyone was in Galut, that they forgot and really didn't know the prayers, didn't know Hebrew, had to be taught during that time, or during that Aliyah period.
I'd say much more than that. Our sages say that Ezra was so great that he is comparable to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's right. The Torah could have given, if Moshe wasn't around, the Torah could have been given by Ezra. Essentially, he's the second Moshe Rabbeinu. There's no Moshes here today. It was one Moshe. The other Moshe is not here. But the second Moshe Rabbeinu. Ezra is here. That's the main thing. Ezra, he really reconstituted Judaism after the destruction. The destruction of the first temple was such a calamity. It was such a horrendous break in what the structure that was created in the really that was the biggest. Until today, we fast not only for the second temple but also for the first temple, because really the first temple meant that we got a long history ahead of us. Destruction of the first temple.
Maybe this is too far-fetched, but what Ezra did reminds me somewhat of Rav Kook. Is that too far to go?
Well, Rav Kook would feel flattered, of course. And Rav Kook really was not the type of leader who reconstituted Judaism. Rav Kook interpreted and gave us direction and gave us guidance, but I wouldn't say he founded an entire new structure of Judaism. Right? It might seem like that because we're all wearing these knitted kippot, and there's a little subculture around the religious Zionists versus other streams of Judaism, but it's a much smaller issue.
I guess more reconnecting Judaism with the land.
Reconnecting with the land, that's what you're connecting to. So, I wouldn't say that was Ezra's forte. Obviously, he did, and he had to deal with all the Jewish people coming back to the land. But primarily, I believe Ezra's major contributions were not in the realm of, other than, of course, building the temple. Ezra came after the temple was built, by the way. Ezra didn't build the temple, and Nehemiah didn't build the temple.
No, Nehemiah built walls around the city.
There was walls around the city. The temple was already started before they got here. They came, as I said, the first Aliyah came in 48 years after the destruction.
Yeah, so they
It's another 12 years that they were in Israel and started to build the temple already. And only after another few years, I have to look it up, did actually Ezra come and become the leader. He came and then went back to Babylon and came a second time. He came with the first Aliyah and then came with the second major Aliyah. It's very, very complicated, but you're learning about it with Rav Michal. With Rav Weinstein. That's right. You're not here in the evenings.
He get the permission to come to the land, but he didn't get permission to build the
That's
wall.
right. That's the 12 years. It took 12 years.
And then after he gets the permission to build the city.
Right.
To build
Cyrus's grandson or great grandson, who was the famously, according to our sages, the child of Esther,
The halachically Jewish one.
the halachically Jewish one maybe, he's the one who actually gave them permission to build the temple, even though they had permission to make Aliyah earlier by Cyrus.
Darius.
That's right.
Darius.
Darius, the second Darius. It's complicated. You'll study it with Rabbi Michal Weinstein. Getting back, see how much time we have. Getting back to the laws of Zorah, L'Chayaim, V'Keva. The question is it dependent on the temple? It's not really connected to the land. Like the other mitzvah we've been talking up till now, like Truma and Meiser, it's only from produce from the land of Israel. They're agricultural mitzvot. This one is a donation, and it's probably when the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed as well. It should apply nowadays. Some people say, and maybe even a Chutz La'aretz. It's not connected to the land. It's not connected to the temple. So maybe it applies. Biblically, even today, the common custom is that it's only practiced in the land of Israel. If a Jew were to have a farm and to have animals which he was slaughtering in Chutz La'aretz, they wouldn't bother with the Zeroa, L'Chayaim, V'Keva. And the common psak is that in Israel, it is a mitzvah from the Torah, even today, even without the temple. Now the difference is that Truma and Chala, all those you have to be pure for. And so that's why we give the basic minimum, because we don't have purity and impurity nowadays. We're just, all the Kohanim, they can't really use it in any case. So we give the bare minimum. But these gifts, the limbs of the animal, they don't have to be tahor. Even if they're tameh, the Kohen can eat them. And any way he wants. It's best to make a nice party with them. The Kohen should eat them and treat them with respect because they're mitzvahs. The best is to make a nice meal out of these gifts of the kahuna. You can also give it to a regular Jew. If the Kohen wants to, once he gets the gift, he can give it to others. Like we said, like the Levi, once he gets the gift, he can give it to others. It doesn't have a special din of Tuma and Tahara. Okay. Now, the mitzvah devolves upon the owner of the animal. If he gives it to a shochet to slaughter the animal, then the shochet has to take off, separate these sections, and ask the owner, which Kohen should I give it to? The owner gets to decide which Kohen gets this. And the custom is, it's a mitzvah to give these gifts right after the shechita, right after the animal is slaughtered. You separate off the cheekbones and the foreleg and the shoulder, as they said, and this intestine, and you give it to the Kohen. Let let's see, what else is there here to say? That also another reason why gets a little bit easier than truma is that what happens if you don't take off the truma? The food's not kosher. I made this very clear to you, right? What happens if you don't take off these gifts to the Kohen, the food is still kosher. It doesn't invalidate the food to be eaten. The owner didn't do his mitzvah of giving to it's a machloket, but lahalacha we paskin that it's still kosher even if you didn't give that gift. So that takes it down a notch in terms of the severity of worrying about how to do this. Now, most slaughter today does not happen in private. Usually it happens in the slaughterhouse, a lot of animals together. The Kohen would, have to go to the slaughterhouse to get his portions, and what does he need that for?
Today's rule, we could have a nice delivery service.
You could have a delivery service, but usually what's done is that you choose a Kohen who is a scholar. Nowadays, the Kohanim don't have an official role, but the original idea is to support the religious leaders. So you find a Kohen who's also a Rosh Yeshiva or something, and basically you give him the money. The value of these three sections, of these three limbs of the animal, is given to the Kohen who's a Talmid Chacham. There are some people who
can then just spend it on anything.
Can spend it on anything they want. That's right. And usually they're going to spend it on the yeshiva. So in a way, it's fulfilling the original mitzvah of supporting the Kohanim, the religious leadership. Maybe this yeshiva, I don't know, maybe you're eating for money, which was donated to a Kohen from these three limbs of the animal. However, many people avoid the mitzvah. How can you avoid the mitzvah? In the simplest way? Yes, Malti?
To take a coin as part of the ownership.
Close, even better.
Don't tell them.
Usually what they do is you take a non-Jew. If the animals belong to a non-Jew, then there's no mitzvah to give off these limbs from the animal. And a lot of people do that. And
So if you have 100 cows, do you have to give those limbs from every single cow?
Even kids, I don't.
Rav Melamed is very against this idea. He says this is a sneaky loophole, and
loophole nonetheless, though.
He doesn't deny the loophole.
Exactly. So there's nothing
it works. It works.
wrong
If
with
it technically works, it works. The best thing, really, he says, is to find a Kohen who's a Rosh Yeshiva, or to support Kollel people who are studying and who happen to be Kohanim, and use this money. It's about it's sort of like 10% that you're supposed to give from your earnings. So this is if you happen to have a slaughterhouse, or you happen to be a farmer who breeds animals, you'll do your mitzvah of tzedakah through doing this mitzvah from the Torah of the limbs of the animal. Yeah, I'll take questions and then we'll have to stop.
If you have 100 cows, you have to give the limbs from each cow, or only
Yes,
X percentage?
each cow. These particular limbs from each particular cow. Another question, Malti.
But if it's not coin go, if it's only a coin setting.
So if it's a Kohen's animal, that's why we don't use that, because if a Kohen's only a part owner, so then the part that belongs to the Kohen, you're not obligated to. But the part that belongs to the Israelite, you are obligated to. So now it's a question of when you make the sale, do you sell the front leg and the cheeks? So you can do that, but it's clear that you're doing that to get away from the mitzvah.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to get away from the mitzvah, it's better to sell the entire animal to a non-Jew, and then it doesn't have to be those specific limbs. But we'll continue talking about this. Today is Monday. One more day. We're going to go through these 5 mitzvot, We'll finish off with the Zroa, L'chayayim, and Keva, and we'll move on to the Bechor, Bezrat Hashem tomorrow. Okay, stop here. Each other.
We would actually hold that way today, though?